Hello students, welcome again. Today in TS7 Human Resource Development, we are going to do a very interesting topic, and the topic which will really help you in your lifetime. A topic which is actually very practical in approach, and a lot of things that you will learn today you will implement in your lifetime. Let's move on to the topic which is called interviews. Yes, interviews. Have you taken one? No? Yes? Did you attempt any interview? What was the preparation? So, did you prepare yourself for the interview? What were the points or criteria that you had in your mind before you went to the interview? Or what are the points and criteria that you should keep in mind? What should you know about interview? Why interview? Isn't it? So many questions. Let's go and decipher these questions one by one. So, the learning objectives for the day are personal interviews, one-on-one, maybe one on a group, what not, and what are different types of those interviews, and then what are the ratings in 7-point plan that we need to understand for interviews, and what are the limitations of the interviews, what are the qualities, and what could be improved in the interviews, what can be done, and last but not the least, physical examination. Why do you need that, and what is the importance and the role of references in the interviews? All right, we'll go one by one. Let's take the first one. As it says, personal interviews. So, in terms of meaning and purpose, it says personal interview. That means a person has to go in person, right? Now, with this COVID-19 situation, a little bit different. Virtual world is also very close to person nowadays. Okay, personal interviews are the most adopted selection process. That's been weighted the most. Obviously, it is the conversation between a person who's interviewee with the interviewer, and it could be more than one person who was interviewing one person, right? It could be a panel. It could be maybe just a interview person with a technical person. We have a person from HR, maybe a person who's actually a psychologist. Why? Let's have a look. Now, obviously, when you employ someone, you have duties and responsibilities on your mind, right? And you know what duties and responsibilities are, what kind of person you look at, what personality you want, a person who's outspoken or a person who's reserved, a person who's more in mathematical calculations, a person who's more analytic, a person who's more, I would say, more in arts and craft, design, animation, what exactly? So, the main purpose of the interview is to do what? So, first thing which I would say that the interview does is to actually rather than interviewee or a candidate telling information about him or her, it's a good idea that the organization representative tells about the organization. So, that's the first thing I think opening should be done, right? Welcome your candidate, have a chit chat, relax, and then maybe start with letting a candidate know about who you are, what organizations are, what things we are looking at, and what are we doing. Now, that's giving information. That's an interview. It's a conversation, right? And that's between method of communication. Now, obtaining information. What information are we obtaining? The candidate has given you a resume already, isn't it? So, you know through resume what candidate is actually has done the qualification or experience and skills and all whatnot. That is why you're calling the person, right? But here, that goes beyond that information which is given in the resume, to confirm those information, maybe to explore further, and lastly to motivate, because obviously as I said that when you sit for an interview, you understand the environment of the organization that really motivates a person to move forward when they start working, or they said, now this is not the place I'm going to go. Okay, now obviously, what information are we looking at in terms of personal interview? We're looking at the information, the person's background, what the person has done, where the person has been working, what actually are the hobbies and interests, what training and education person has done, where this training was, if that was a working, then under which you can say organizations the person has worked, and what was the time frame, what the roles were there, what responsibilities were there, because it's a mix of all the information that really brings the interviewer an overall understanding about the candidate, and then at the same time they're always matching and mapping with exactly what role they're looking at, isn't it? And then comes education and interest. What education do they have, what interest do they have? So they all comes as an information that really needs to be done, mapped rather would say, with the job role or job specification and the candidate. Now, there are different types of interviews. I'm talking about personal interviews, and we'll go one by one. The first thing, informal interview. As its name says, it's informal. That means you don't have to be formally sitting over there in the office and chair. Now, I'll give you one example. In 2015, I appeared for both formal and informal. I'll give you an example and then come back to explain this. In one of the interview, which was a formal interview, I was actually I had my full folder with all the degrees and qualifications and experiences and all. I was wearing a suit, and we had a time where I was called. Then we sat over there. I had a personal manager from HR, I had a HOD from the department, and I had a person who was a coordinator. So three of them, a panel was there, they were interviewing me. So we had a formal setup, right? That was first thing, and then that was a formal interview, okay? A formal setting, and they had structured questions they asked me. And then I had another organization where I cleared the first stage of the interview, and then they called me to the second stage of interview, and that was informal. And when I'm saying informal, it was on a cup of coffee. Yes, it was. So they called me over. They said, okay, hey, Bharat, you're here for the second interview? Yes, I am. Let's go for a coffee. So we went to a coffee, and we were having a chit chat, having a coffee at that time. That was my casual interview. So it was between me and the manager who wanted to hire me, who wanted to see how I'm going, maybe communication, how I'm behaving, dealing, whatnot. So that something was done there. So that was informal interview. So I think it makes it very clear, formal and informal. Planned interview. Obviously, it's again a formal interview, as I would actually relate to my first example I gave you, where it was very structured. Yes, very structured. That means they had actually a full, I think 4 or 5 pages. The three of them were having those format. They were actually going questions by a format. So whatever answers I gave, 3 of them were writing in the structured format. That's what answers I gave and what questions they were supposed to ask, and who is asking what question was also planned, right? And then that was a planned interview. That means they have a structure we are actually getting the interview done. And then second comes a pattern, wherein, well, in this interview what happens is that this interview is given so that there are some questions they want to ask, but at the same time they want to give some, you can say, freedom to the candidate, wherein some general questions could be asked, some personal life, some sports and whatnot. But before I move forward, I want to really bring it very clear. The interview is a conversation between two parties. One party who really wants to hire a candidate for the specific job role. Second party is a person or a professional who really wants to join that organization to do the same job role. So both of them should be on the same page. They must understand. So it's not a favor. Anyone is not doing favor to each other. I tell you, I have been to an interview and I've told them, sorry, I'm not joining you after I go for the interview, because I ask some questions after the interview. So what happens is, at the end of the interview, they ask you, do you have any questions? And I say, yes, I have my questions ready when I go there, and I actually interview them. If they actually give me answers which I'm looking at, fair enough, that's the organization I'm looking forward to. But if I don't get the satisfied answer, And if I say these people are not that structured, I rather say, I'm sorry, I don't think I would be able to join or go further. Thank you for your time. One of the incidents happened with me that they were appointing me as head of the department where there were only 13 students and there was a coordinator or a supervisor. When I asked them the number of students and strength, and they said there are 13 students and we're looking for so and so, so and so. I said, I'm sorry, with 13 students, I don't think I have much of a job role to do because you already have a coordinator who can fill in this position. I won't be able to work for you. I was very open and straight because I saw that it's no point having a supervisor as well as a head of the department. So similarly, it's a conversation between two parties, right? Then comes non-directive interviews. So we here, interviewee is given a free hand, or he's given a time, okay, it's your turn, please let us know how do you best fit this organization. Then he or she has to sell or himself or match the skills and knowledge with the job requirement. That's called non-directive. And there are some interviews which are very, very in-depth. As I was telling you earlier, the planned interview was quite in-depth. You know why? Because that was a head of the department role and it was a bigger position. And when it's a bigger position, the many areas, the areas of management, the areas of skills, the areas of human resource, the area of what's called overall your personality, communication, there's so many areas, and then they have to dig deep. And obviously in such interviews they take a interest in the person. If the person has a special interest in anything, then how best a person is actually letting you know about the interest. So I still remember there was one other interview for one of the hotels in Melbourne, and they said, we are keen to know your hobby. Please bring your hobby along with you. So we had to actually explain about your hobby, not about it. So that was actually the first step, was to explain your hobby. If you Google up now, even now, and you look for a flight center, which is there in India too. But at that time, if I was in Australia, I was trying for myself, and the flight center says, okay, tell us something about yourself. You have to write down before even you actually go for the interview. And then when you go over there, there is again levels of interviews going on. So what I'm trying to say is, nowadays, a special interest or your hobby is a very great area they're looking for, because they'll ask you questions based on those interests and see how much knowledge and skills do you have, how much interest do you have. If you have interest in that particular skill or the game or art or craft, if you're putting your heart and soul there, you will put in heart and soul in the work you're given or the job role you're provided. Okay, and there is another one, stress interview. Now, there are situations where you could be under pressure. Imagine a restaurant and a chef who has 40 tables, and then all the tables are full and they're ordering. So imagine how much pressure things are going on, but you have to make sure you're calm. You have to make sure you are managing your situations in those times, and you're not actually losing your control. That's a conduct which is examined in the stress interview. And then comes a very famous of mine, or a very favorite of mine, is group interview. Now, why I said very favorite of mine, because when I was young and I was finishing my college that time, I had a big fear of the group interview. I had a fear to start. I did not have a fear to stop. Once I start, then I go that no one can beat me or challenge me. But I could not start. Always I had a trouble starting into the group interview. But then I still remember that I had many interviews where I could not be successful. But then I had some interviews where I was successful. Okay, now what happens in a group interview? That two important things. Number one, how do you represent your ideas? How do you start? This is my issue. How do you start and put your views forward? That's the first thing. And second, how open are you to accept others' views? Yeah, because it's a group conversation, so you have to respect each other, and when you respond, how polite and how specific are you in responding the questions. So that's where it is. And then obviously last but not the least is panel interview, which could be a board, it could be 3 members, 5 members panel who is actually looking at those, and I gave you example that I had a panel interview. Now when we're doing all those interviews, obviously we have to find out few things, okay. So there are aspects of personality, that means how we try to find out difference from one candidate to another candidate, because you may be interviewing 20 candidates or maybe 10 candidates, so you have to choose one. So there are few steps over here, also called 7-point plan. Let's look at it, this 7-point plan. It was done way 1951 this plan came out, but it's still being applicable and it still makes sense. So the first is physical makeup. We look at how the person looks like, what is the health of person, how does it speak, how does it present himself or herself. So when you go for the interview, so that's why you're saying attire really makes a difference. Then comes attainments, which comes what education qualification a person have achieved, have they got skills or any vocational qualification which is required for the job role, and how does those qualifications match the job role, what experience a person has with regards to the attainments that they have. So, and how are these, again we are mapping everything to the job role, to the position description. And then comes your intellectual capacity, because at some point of time you may have to take some decisions, and then you know how good you could be based on what you are asked questions and all, you have to demonstrate that. Then there are some special aptitude like manual dexterity, how good you use words and figures, what are your interests, if you are socially active, physically active, or you're more artistic. Remember I gave you example that one of the hotels, they wanted your hobbies to be either represented, and based on that they were actually hiring people. And then disposition in terms of how do you stand up and influence others. Are you really able to involve, or are you really able to influence, are you really able to work with the teams, how are you doing, or you actually really want someone to give you orders, or you really need or you can do a self-reliance, or it says that unsupervised work. So again, that's something we are looking at, not necessarily that all will be required in a particular job, it will change from job to job and organization to organization. Circumstances, I'll give you another example here. I was working for one of the organizations where I had injury in my hand. When I had injury in my hand, but like doctor said, yes you can work, but you can do light work. So obviously that job, they gave me light work, but my work was reduced. So I was looking for work somewhere else. When I was looking for work somewhere else, so that's a time I said, hey, this is a request that I need to be given these things, because that I will put a brace in my hand, which will actually be not looking very great, but this is what is the requirement. So, well, yes, they agreed, but it could be that you could disagree. And then also, if another situation is that I was traveling to a different state, and I used to stay 1 week outside away from my family, and that could be job demands, and can you really focus on that? I also traveled a lot around the world because I was working for Merchant Navy. I was a chef there. So when I used to work over there, I used to be away for 9 months in a year. So that's my circumstances, which is a requirement of the job. So can the person be suiting that situation or not? Now, if I look at it, those 7 you can say points, if you look at the 7 points, so we have to actually make a matrix, and obviously in the matrix on the right hand side, so we have to map if the candidate is outstanding, good, above average, below average, or unsatisfactory, and we give a point or marks to each, let's say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Then what we do is, if you look at it for special aptitude, disposition, circumstances, we look at it, I will give marks. So what happens is, when we give marks, we make total of those marks, and that the final score actually tells you where the person stands. A person may be good at circumstances, may not be good at attainments or intelligence. Now, when we move further from here, we look at the limitations. Obviously, there are limitations for the interview, because interviews cannot depict everything. The first thing is the importance of power in the interview, which is, always remember, when you go for an interview, you actually have some nerves, isn't it? You feel a bit nervous, you feel a bit uncomfortable, but look at the person who's taking interview. So he knows the stuff, right? He is a person who's taking your interview. So should you be nervous? Well, small nerves are always there. Even today, if I go for an interview, I'm a little bit nervous, but when I reach over there, it's a job of the interviewer to make sure that they put the other person at ease and they make them comfortable, give them a glass of water, talk a bit here and there before they start the real interview. Yeah? So that's obviously it's a common defect, because the power lies in the interviewer, because he's going to decide selection, not selection. But actually, it's a communications two-way process, isn't it? The second is phony or not so truthful behavior. Because I've done so many interviews and I know how to crack the interview now. Well, I have given more than 40, 50 interviews, so I know how to crack interviews now. So I'll be very good when I go for interviews. I'm very good at it. But am I good at doing the job roles? May not be. But what happens is, sometimes some candidates, they express themselves so great in the interview, but when they look at the work at the main, when you start working, you don't find the same thing that you expected, you heard from them in the interview. So what happens is, then maybe the wrong candidate is actually employed, and maybe you have to go for another job interview, you have to sack the person, give them warnings, and you cannot just sack the person straight away. You have to give them warnings, you have to let them know what they are not doing proper, and so on and so forth. The whole process may take 3 to 6 months, but the work impacts those 3 to 6 months. And finally, open-ended questions like, tell me something about yourself. So I will ask you a question. Okay, tell me, what do you know in your TS7? Well, I know a lot of things. So it's good idea to be structured rather than just open-ended. Yeah, it's good to start the conversation. Hey, how are you? Tell me something about yourself. But interview itself, maybe this is not the best question to ask unless it is to make the person comfortable. So there are some other limitations, such as subjective judgment. Now, as an interviewer, you may actually like some behavior or may not like some behavior, or you may be biased by gender, by qualification, by age, by any such things. If that's the case, that's a no-no. That's again a limitation. Another one is one prominent characteristics may dominate entire personality. That means I like the way this person communicates, but that's not entire thing. He may not be true, or he or she may not be having the knowledge and skills, but very good communication. So one prominent characteristic must not be taken. Again, the interviewer's experience in creating liking particular traits. So what happens is, because I have taken more than 70 interviews in my life, more than that, and when the candidate comes, I know what traits to look for. Not necessarily. Every interview is different. So I may be inclined, if this candidate is saying so, fair enough, he's a good candidate or he is not a good candidate. So it's again, what if I don't have had any experience in taking anyone's interview, or if I do not know the job role properly? Will I be able to do the interview properly? Nah. So that's again, the experience of interview is very, very important. And then comes manager's belief. That's another thing. Using pseudo-scientific methods in decision making. So, well, if I believe, if this candidate is tall, he is going to be good. If this girl is maybe has a good smile, she is going to be a good receptionist. Well, Smiling is required, but more than smile, attitude is there. A lot of other things are required to be a good receptionist, isn't it? And then there's some qualities that we're looking at into interviewer, which are the knowledge of the job role. So if I actually have done the job role, or if I know about the job role in and out, I really can take a good interview and I can decide who is a good and bad candidate, isn't it? Also, interviewer must understand that the person who's the candidate for the interview is nervous and he or she may make mistakes. So emotionally, you should understand, you should be mature enough to understand the candidate's mental state of mind and the behavior, and you should be stable, not to be very agitated, because there could be some questions which are not very comfortably answered. So you be mature enough to understand and take decisions. Okay. Sensitivity to interviewee's emotional state, as I was explaining you. Well, you must make the person at ease, make them comfortable so that you can actually understand what the real skills and qualities are. And obviously, the interviewer, or he must be actually an extrovert, because if he or she is not speaking out, then you're not communicating enough, you're not communicating well, so do that, get the information, because you are going to get the information. So that was some traits of good interviewer. And then how can we improve the interview? Number one, we must make sure we follow the guidelines, and the first one is the timelines. So you must set a timeline for interview and you must not hurry that, and you should follow that. And obviously, when you're doing an interview, you're interviewing a human one, right? So you should have a human touch. It should not be impersonal. So you should not say, yes, okay, candidate, no, it's a name. Please start with a name, or welcome them, offer them a glass of water or coffee, whatnot. Yes, that should be the way ahead. Now, you must be maintaining the privacy, because a lot of information, personal information is being given to you, and it must be maintained. And it's not just that resume is gone to the bin and then bin goes outside and his date of birth and details whatnot is outside on the street. Well, another important aspect is careful listening and recording, because listening does the major role, and you must be patient enough to listen, because if you listen properly, you're able to match the job roles. And lastly, the pseudo-scientific methods, as I said, impression of personality, or his good height can be a better employee, or small height is not a good employee, whatnot, or any basis for male, female, gender, whatnot, that should be avoided. Now, after interviews, the physical examination is done. Why physical examination? It's done by a physician or even a local doctor or medical officer. Why? So that's to know if the person is fit for the job role. It could be, it's a physical fitness, if they can take up the job role, or if there were any existing issues and disabilities, because there is an insurance scheme which is called work cover or medical insurance and treatment. But the things are already there, then organization may not put in that job role itself. If there's any contagious disease discovery which a candidate did not know, or even candidate knew but hid from others, so that can impact others. Now obviously, there are some modification equipment, as I was telling you that I had an issue in my hand, I said, okay, I have to put this brace, and before that, so yeah, there could be a modification in the equipment that is, helps you do the job. Also, the physical examination contains medical history, such as physical measurements, general examination in skill, muscle and joints, maybe senses, if you can hear properly, if you can see properly. How can you, put a driver who cannot even see? So you can't put a blind person as a driver, isn't it? That's not safe, unless there are new cars coming, which is called driverless cars coming very soon, which is coming in future. We have also clinical examination in terms of physical, looking at eyes, ears, nose, throats, chest and lungs, blood pressure, and even pathological tests such as blood and urine. I'll tell you something, an example of personal. So in the year 2005, I believe, I was joining my ship. So we always used to have examination before every time you join the ship, because on the ship there is no doctor. So I was actually made to hold for 2 months because my SGOT, SGPT levels were high, which is like liver function tests were higher. So I was actually put on hold till I get my levels down, and I was waiting for 2 to 3 months before I could join the ship again. Now the most important part is the reference check. Yes, reference check is done to make sure what you're saying is being, justified by someone, or someone supports you. So it's called referee, who justifies your work experience. Who can do that? If you're working somewhere, your previous current employee can do that, your manager can do that, or even professional colleagues can do that. They can tell who you are, how you work, and there'll be a lot of questions. And I have done more than maybe 30, 40 reference already for my different students, for my staff, because as I told you that I've been working for a long time, but they call you or they send an email and you have to respond to the emails. So let's conclude. What did we learn? We learned about personal interviews and different types of personal interviews. We did see a 7-point plan where how we calculate, the grading and the marks about the interview. We also saw the limitations in the interviews and what qualities and how can we improve the interviews. Also, we look at the physical examination and references. With this, I conclude this session. I'd like to thank you for today and have a great day.